Most people don't realize that the world's largest retailer is quietly retreating from the United States, not because of competition, not because of changing consumer habits, but because America's own trade policies have made it too expensive to serve American customers. What we're witnessing is not just a corporate restructuring, it's the unraveling of a 40-year economic model that kept goods affordable for millions of families. To understand the magnitude of this crisis, consider these numbers. Walmart serves over 265 million customers weekly and employs 1.6 million Americans. They operate 4,700 stores across the country and maintain the most sophisticated supply chain network ever built. This isn't some niche retailer struggling to adapt. This is the economic backbone of rural and working-class America, the company that democratized consumption by making everything from groceries to electronics accessible to families earning $30,000 a year. When Walmart retreats, entire communities lose access to affordable food, medicine, and basic necessities. We're not talking about inconvenience. We're talking about survival for millions of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck. Today, we're going to examine how protectionist policies designed to strengthen American manufacturing have instead created food deserts, driven up prices, and pushed one of America's most essential retailers toward the exit door. More importantly, we'll explore how this crisis reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern global economics actually function. For 4 decades, the implicit contract between the global economy and North American consumers was straightforward. We allowed domestic manufacturing to move overseas, accepted factory closures, and in exchange, received access to affordable goods. Walmart became the physical embodiment of this bargain. The company built its empire on always low prices by creating the most sophisticated global supply chain in history, sourcing products from the cheapest manufacturers worldwide and delivering them to American consumers at razor-thin profit margins. This wasn't just a business strategy. It was a social contract that allowed America to maintain its standard of living even as real wages stagnated. The mathematics of this arrangement were elegant and brutal. The average American household spends about $4,000 annually at Walmart. For families earning $30,000 to $50,000 per year, that represents 8 to 13% of their entire income. When Walmart's model works, it acts as a massive wealth redistribution system, allowing working-class Americans to maintain middle-class consumption patterns despite decades of wage stagnation. Consider what this meant in practice. A single mother in rural Tennessee could buy school clothes for her children at prices that would have been unimaginable just a generation earlier. A retiree on a fixed income could afford prescription medications alongside fresh groceries. Small-town America didn't just survive the deindustrialization of the late 20th century. It maintained dignity and purchasing power because Walmart made imported goods artificially cheap. This ecosystem operated within stable international trade rules that had been carefully negotiated over decades. Goods moved predictably across borders. Shipping costs remained manageable due to economies of scale, and tariffs were minimal thanks to multilateral trade agreements. Currency fluctuations were managed through sophisticated hedging mechanisms, and supply chains were optimized for efficiency rather than political considerations. But this entire system was built on an assumption that trade policies would remain relatively consistent and rational, guided by economic principles rather than political theater. When that assumption was shattered by sudden dramatic policy changes driven by electoral politics rather than economic analysis, the whole model began to collapse like a house of cards. Here's what many people misunderstand about tariffs. They're not a fee paid by foreign countries. Despite political rhetoric suggesting otherwise, tariffs are taxes paid by the importing company at the border. When the current administration implemented Liberation Day tariffs, establishing baseline duties of 10% on most imports, and escalating to 145% on goods from certain countries, they effectively handed American retailers a massive tax bill. Let me give you a concrete example that illustrates the mathematical impossibility of this approach. A shipping container of household goods that previously cost Walmart $50,000 to import now costs $55,000 with the base tariff, or $7,500 from China with higher penalties. Walmart's entire business model is built on moving these goods at a 23-25% markup with profit margins of just 2-3% after all expenses. This means a $50,000 container generates about $1,000 to $1,500 in profit for Walmart after paying for transportation, warehousing, staff, and all other operational costs. But a $5,000 tariff increase wipes out the profit from 3 to 5 containers. Mathematically, it's impossible to absorb these costs and remain profitable. But let's dig deeper into what this means for specific products. Take a basic coffee maker that Walmart previously imported from Vietnam for $15. They would sell it for $19.99, earning roughly $1.50 in profit after all costs. With the new tariffs, that same coffee maker now costs $16.50 to import. The situation becomes even more complex with products that cross borders multiple times during manufacturing. Modern supply chains are incredibly intricate. A single item might have components manufactured in 5 different countries before final assembly. Each border crossing now represents a potential tariff hit, creating cumulative cost increases that make many products economically unviable. Unlike luxury retailers like Nordstrom or Saks Fifth Avenue that can pass costs to affluent customers who view shopping as lifestyle expression, Walmart's customer base is fundamentally price sensitive. These are families choosing between name brand groceries and store brands, people who clip coupons and shop sales, retirees on fixed incomes who calculate the cost per ounce of laundry detergent. Raise prices too much, and they simply stop buying non-essential items or switch to even cheaper alternatives. This created what economists call a demand destruction scenario where Walmart faced 2 impossible options: pass costs to consumers and watch sales collapse as customers fled to dollar stores or secondhand shops, or stop importing goods entirely and watch shelves empty while still paying fixed costs for store staff and distribution networks. The company initially tried a third option, absorbing the costs and hoping the tariffs would be temporary. For the first quarter after implementation, Walmart's profit margins dropped to just 0.8%, essentially break-even territory. They burned through $2.3 billion in cash reserves trying to maintain their price promise to customers. But when it became clear that the tariffs weren't temporary policy tools, but permanent fixtures of the new trade landscape, they were forced to make the brutal choice between corporate survival and customer loyalty. The chaos this has created extends far beyond corporate balance sheets. The just-in-time logistics model, designed to minimize inventory costs by moving goods quickly and efficiently, has collapsed under the weight of uncertainty. Shipping costs have exploded. The price to move a standard container from Asia to the U.S. West Coast surged from $3,500 to $6,500 in just 3 weeks following tariff implementation. The human cost becomes visible when we examine specific communities affected by these closures, and the stories reveal the true price of economic nationalism. In Rapids, Minnesota, the closure of the region's largest Walmart in August 2025 sent shockwaves through the community that continue months later. For elderly and low-income families, this store was far more than retail. It was the only reliable source of groceries within a 20-mile radius. With limited public transportation and prohibitive delivery fees, residents now face impossible choices. The mathematics of survival have changed dramatically. Previously, a typical grocery trip cost $80 for a week's food. Now, residents must drive 40 miles to the nearest supermarket, burning at $12 in gas and losing half a day, or pay inflated prices at convenience stores where basic staples cost 60-80% more. Consider Mary Henderson, a 73-year-old widow living on $1,200 monthly Social Security. She can't drive at night and barely affords gas for long trips. Her monthly food budget increased from $200 to $340 just to maintain the same nutrition, forcing choices between medication, copays, and proper meals. Local church food pantries report 180% increases in requests from seniors since the closure. In Corsicana, Texas, the Walmart Supercenter closure severed lifelines extending beyond retail. This store was the primary SNAP redemption location for over 4,000 families, and the only pharmacy within 35 miles accepting Medicaid, serving diabetics, heart patients, and chronically ill residents. The ripple effects are measurable and devastating. Local emergency rooms report 45% increases in diabetic emergencies, as patients ration insulin they can no longer afford. The county health department documents rising malnutrition among children and seniors as families stretch budgets to cover transportation to distant stores. Tariffs on Mexican agricultural imports hit Texas particularly hard, making it impossible for Walmart to maintain profitable operations in smaller markets. Fresh produce prices increased 35-50% overnight, as supply chains operating seamlessly for decades were disrupted by bureaucratic barriers. The result has been a strategic retreat that few Americans fully comprehend, but whose effects are rippling through communities from coast to coast. Walmart has temporarily shut down 10 major distribution centers across the United States, from Riverside, California, to Winter Haven, Florida, to Groveport, Ohio. These aren't small facilities. They are massive industrial operations that employed thousands and served as the beating heart of regional supply chains. Each distribution center processes between 500,000 to 1.2 million packages daily, coordinating the flow of goods to hundreds of stores across multiple states. The Riverside facility alone serves 127 stores across Southern California and Nevada, handling everything from fresh produce that must be delivered within 48 hours to electronics that require specialized handling and security protocols. When these centers shut down, the regional logistics network collapsed. Stores that receive daily deliveries now rely on expensive emergency shipping from distant facilities. A truck route that cost $800 from Riverside to San Diego now costs $2,200 from Phoenix, with longer transit times requiring additional refrigeration and higher spoilage rates. The closure of these hubs put over 50,000 positions at risk. The economic carnage extends beyond direct employment. Truck stops, logistics companies, restaurants, and gas stations near these facilities report 60-80% drops in traffic as their economic ecosystem disappears. The most visible impact has been store closures. In the first half of 2025, Walmart closed 154 stores across 27 states, resulting in 10,000 direct layoffs. Each closure affects 8,000 to 12,000 customers who relied on that location for essentials. The closure pattern also reveals racial and economic disparities. Analysis shows 67% of closed stores were in counties with below average median income, and 52% were in majority minority areas. These communities were promised the greatest benefits from bringing manufacturing back, but they're paying the highest price as retail infrastructure disappears. Consider what happened in Rapids, Minnesota, when the region's largest Walmart closed in August 2025. This was not just a retail outlet for elderly and low-income families in the area. It was the only reliable source of groceries within a 20-mile radius. With limited public transportation and prohibitive delivery fees, residents now face a brutal choice: drive 40 miles to the nearest supermarket or pay dramatically inflated prices at small convenience stores. The story becomes more troubling when we examine the specific communities affected. In Corsicana, Texas, 50 miles south of Dallas, the closure of a Walmart supercenter severed a lifeline for the community. This store was the primary location for residents to redeem SNAP benefits and the only place to find affordable groceries. Now, residents must drive over 40 miles to reach the nearest full-service supermarket. The tariffs on Mexican agricultural imports hit Texas particularly hard, driving up produce costs to the point where Walmart could no longer maintain profitable operations in smaller markets. In Visalia, California, the closure of a neighborhood market has disproportionately affected multi-generational immigrant families working in agriculture and caregiving. These are essential workers operating on tight budgets, and California imports the vast majority of its goods from Asia and Mexico. When tariffs took effect, the cost of storing and shipping temperature-controlled goods rose weekly, forcing Walmart to scale back rather than absorb mounting losses. The ripple effects are devastating. Local food banks report 60% increases in demand. Church pantries that used to serve 50 families weekly now struggle to help 180. These communities are witnessing the collapse of a system they never realized was so fragile. Perhaps most telling is what happened in Venice, Florida, a community of over 22,000 residents, many of them retirees on fixed incomes. These aren't people who were poor in the traditional sense. They're pensioners who planned their finances carefully around predictable costs. But their planning didn't account for a 50% surge in food prices caused by tariffs on Latin American imports. Seniors who can no longer drive long distances are now trapped, forced to shop at smaller stores where basic items cost double what they paid at Walmart. A gallon of milk that cost $3.50 now costs nearly $6. To understand why this is happening, we need to look at the mathematics of retail economics and the complex web of relationships that make modern commerce possible. Walmart operates a high-velocity, low-margin model, making money by turning inventory quickly, buying goods cheaply, selling them at small markups, and repeating the process millions of times with ruthless efficiency. This model requires extraordinary precision. Walmart manages 100,000 suppliers worldwide, coordinates 158 distribution centers, and ensures 4,700 stores are restocked with the right products at the right time. A single miscalculation cascades through the entire network. When tariffs disrupted this system, they triggered a supply shock, sudden cost changes that can't be absorbed without destroying demand. But the damage went beyond cost increases. The unpredictability made long-term planning impossible. Here's a real example that illustrates the cascading complexity. Before tariffs, Walmart could buy a coffee maker from Vietnam for $15, knowing that price would remain stable for 6 to 12 months, allowing them to plan inventory pricing and promotional strategies. They would sell it for $19 to $1.99, earning roughly $1.50 in profit after all costs. With tariffs, that coffee maker costs $16.50 to import, but more importantly, the price could change again next month depending on political developments. This uncertainty poisons retail operations. Walmart's pricing algorithms, developed over decades, suddenly became unreliable. Promotional campaigns had to be scrapped because cost structures shifted faster than marketing could adapt. Seasonal inventory strategies collapsed as suppliers couldn't guarantee consistent pricing. The situation becomes exponentially complex with products crossing borders multiple times during manufacturing. A typical electronics item might have rare earth elements from Africa, processed in China, combined with components from South Korea and Malaysia, assembled in Vietnam, and shipped through multiple ports. Each step now represents potential tariff exposure, creating cumulative costs that can make products unviable overnight. Walmart has attempted to adapt through Project Rebuild, a $25 billion restructuring representing one of the largest corporate pivots in American history. The project focuses on rapid Chinese decoupling, building domestic manufacturing through Made in Heartland, and massive automation investments. But rebuilding a 40-year supply chain in 18 months is like heart surgery while running a marathon. Vietnamese and Indian factories experience 6-month backlogs as companies rush to find Chinese alternatives. These facilities lack the supply chains, workforce, and infrastructure China built over decades. The Made in Heartland initiative faces even steeper challenges. Modern manufacturing requires trained technicians, reliable suppliers, transportation networks, regulatory approvals, and domestic suppliers for thousands of components that currently exist only in Asia. The initiative has announced 47 new facilities, but only 3 have broken ground, none expected operational before 2027. Existing American manufacturers lack capacity for disrupted imports. Walmart's automation systems can now process 85% more orders with 40% fewer workers, but cost $2.3 million per facility, an investment that makes sense only when traditional supply chains are permanently disrupted. While the United States has descended into supply chain chaos and inflation, a very different story has been unfolding to the north. Canada, rather than accepting collateral damage from Washington's trade wars, has executed what many analysts call a masterclass in economic statecraft that deserves careful study by anyone interested in how middle powers can maintain sovereignty in an increasingly volatile world. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney's leadership, Canada has pursued what diplomatic observers call an elbows-up strategy, refusing to be passive victims of American protectionism while maintaining the moral high ground in international forums. When the U.S. imposed tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and eventually energy, Ottawa's initial response was predictable, matching tariffs on politically sensitive American exports like bourbon, orange juice, and agricultural equipment from swing states. But then Canada made a counterintuitive move that confused pundits but revealed sophisticated strategic thinking. In August 2025, they dropped many retaliatory tariffs and addressed specific U.S. complaints about digital services taxes and border security measures. To observers focused on short-term political theater, this looked like capitulation. In reality, it was a masterful example of strategic positioning. By removing excuses for American aggression, Canada positioned itself as the reasonable actor while building coalitions with frustrated allies. European trade representatives praised Canada's mature approach, while criticizing American economic vandalism. Canada used this crisis to address internal weaknesses. The button de nurse. The One Canadian Economy Act eliminated interprovincial trade barriers that made shipping goods to Texas easier than from Saskatchewan to Ontario. Professional licenses and standards now flow freely across provinces, boosting GDP by an estimated 2.3% annually. The Building Canada Act fast-tracked infrastructure projects that had languished for years. A hydro transmission line from Manitoba to Ontario, stalled for 5 years in review, was approved with construction beginning within 14 days. This signals to investors that Canada moves at business speed, not government speed. The results are already visible in hard trade data that tells a story of strategic success. As American supply chains falter and Walmart retreats, Canadian exports to the U.S. have actually increased in key sectors. Canadian beef exports jumped 22%, filling gaps left by collapsed American distribution networks. Pork exports hit record levels as American processors struggled with tariff-disrupted supply chains. Most ironically, grocery stores in Wisconsin and Michigan, states that voted for protectionist policies, now stock Canadian products because they're more reliably available than American alternatives. But the Canadian strategy extends beyond filling American gaps. Ottawa has launched aggressive trade offensives in Europe and Asia, recognizing that dependence on any single market creates vulnerability. The Canada-EU Strategic Partnership Agreement includes technology sharing, defense cooperation, and coordinated responses to economic coercion. Canada has also recalibrated its relationship with China without falling into binary traps. While criticizing human rights violations, Canada positioned itself as a pragmatic trading partner distinct from U.S. containment strategy. Canadian exports to China resumed at record levels, while tech companies use Canadian facilities as neutral ground for transactions that can't occur directly between Chinese and American firms. What we're witnessing represents more than a temporary disruption. It's a fundamental restructuring of North American economic relationships. The empty shelves in American Walmarts aren't just inconveniences. They're warnings about what happens when ideology overrides economic reality. The numbers tell the story. Grocery prices have risen 35% in affected areas, prescription drug access has been cut for thousands, and rural unemployment has spiked in communities that lost their anchor retailer. The lesson isn't about free trade versus protectionism in abstract terms. It's about the concrete consequences of breaking systems that millions depend on for daily survival. When you dismantle a supply chain overnight in the name of political symbolism, it's not politicians who pay the price. It's the grandmother in Florida deciding whether she can afford milk. Canada's response offers an alternative model, using crisis as an opportunity to build resilience through diversification, internal efficiency, and stable partnerships. While the US chose economic nationalism, Canada chose pragmatism. The great irony is that policies designed to make America self-sufficient have instead made it more dependent on neighbors who are rapidly building alternatives to American markets. As this decoupling continues, we are seeing a new North American reality where American economic dominance can no longer be taken for granted, and where the quiet competence of neighbors might prove more valuable than loud rhetoric. The empty spaces on American store shelves remind us that prosperity isn't a birthright. It's the result of careful choices, complex relationships, and institutions built over decades. Break those systems carelessly, and the consequences can last for generations. The Walmart retreat crisis serves as a case study in how quickly economic assumptions can unravel. It demonstrates that in our interconnected world, protectionist policies often backfire, hurting the very people they claim to protect. What changes have you noticed in your local stores? Share your observations in the comments below. Your firsthand perspective helps us understand the real scope of these economic shifts.